Hello everyone, I'm Women International Master Knarik and I'm using the chesswithknarik.com website to record this video. In this video, we're going to see an endgame where both sides have rooks. We have the white pieces. We, of course, also have here two additional pass pawns. Now, this should definitely be winning for white, especially here if it's white's turn. White can simply just move the king closer to the rook, attack the black rook, at the same time defend the pawn that's on c2. In time, slowly but surely, white is going to win. Of course, not so surely because rook games are not so simple to play. We have to be still very careful and play very carefully with white for us to win this, because a rook can cause a lot of trouble, can keep on checking and attacking our pawns. So it will be an end game where we will have to be careful for several moves at least until we're winning this end game. But there is another way that we can win this game, and in a much simpler way. If we are familiar with the pawn end games and the basic pawn end games, we can just trade the rooks and go to a much simpler pawn end game where we know that we are winning. Because if we just remove the rooks off the chessboard here with two extra pawns, of course we're going to win, and very simply, without the headache of having to deal with a rook that's going to check our king and we need to always hide and try to find ways to stop our opponent's rook from stopping our plans. So how can we do that? I can see a very straightforward way here for white to trade the rooks, but it's going to cost us something. Here, for example, we can play rook to c5 check, and okay, because it's a check and at the same time we're attacking the black rook. Black definitely will capture our rook and we're going to be trading. But what will be costing us? What will this be costing us? It will be first, we have doubled pawns here now. They're not the pawns on the B and the C files connected. And other than that, here we won't be able to keep this pawn on c5 because the black king is close to it, so we're gonna lose one of the pawns. So basically we're going to a pawn endgame with one extra pawn, not with two extra pawns when we trade the rooks. Okay, so now I know I'm going to a pawn endgame with one extra pawn, and so I need to think about all the information that I know in the pawn endgames and what positions should I try to reach to. Okay, if I want to win this with white. So I know that black is going to capture this pawn. So I need to think, when black captures this pawn, where do I want my king to be? When black captures this pawn with a king, I want my king to take the opposition. That's the only way that we can win this game. So let's see. And we will review how we will win it, of course. So here, when black goes to capture our pawn, I just have to make sure that I'm going to be able to take the opposition when black captures our pawn. Now, let's say I'm moving to d3, okay, and black captured our pawn on c5, and now I'm taking the opposition. And this is winning for white. We know this because we know that if we have an extra pawn and we want to win our king, if our king can get to one of the key squares of that pawn, it means that we are going to be winning this game. And the key squares were just two squares ahead of the pawn and the two squares next to it. So here black is moving away from the opposition, and we already got to one of the important squares that's needed for us to promote this pawn. That's a key square. Now again, if black moves away, we take the opposition, and black is moving away from the opposition. We now occupy another key square that's needed when we even push our pawn, right? So we had said that we don't need to hurry and push our pawn, because if we do that, especially here, for example, if I push my pawn two squares forward, the key squares are going to be pushed forward as well. So I need to occupy one of those squares with my king to win. And if black takes the opposition, black will never allow us to take one of those key squares. So we don't really need to push the pawn. Um, if it's not necessary, we can just keep on taking the opposition and occupying more, let's say, advanced key squares, so that even if now I push my pawn, my king is already on a key square. So here, and of course, if black doesn't keep on moving, let's say, in front of our pawn, and then it is even easier for us to win, because staying, let's say, on the side, we can just push the pawn as well, and that's not a problem at all. So let's see, let's go back. Uh, okay, so let's go back to our position. Now, what if um, after trading the rooks, black does play the king to c6, and then when we play to uh, d3 with our king, black does not capture our pawn, but just uh, moves away the king to d5, because now black is probably also aware of all the pawn end games, or the basic pawn end games that they need to know, and they're just waiting for us to play king to c3, and then black is going to capture our pawn and take the opposition. And here, black is never going to allow us to occupy any of the key squares anymore, because anytime we move our king, the black is going to take the opposition. Anytime we move our king, black is going to take the opposition. And moving too far is not going to be good for us, of course, because then black can just get closer to our pawn, and again, it's going to be even more difficult to occupy any of the key squares for our king. So going back here, and let's say, instead of moving away, and let's say our opponent taking the opposition, what if we just push the pawn once or twice? But we said that that's not such a good idea, because our king should, as like a default, our king should always be ahead of the pawn, because let's say if we push the pawn even right next to the king, now the key squares are pushed even more ahead, let's say just to b5, c5, and d5, and the black will never allow us to move to any of those squares. If black is playing carefully, of course, we will never make it. And if we push the pawn, instead of one, we push it two squares, then the key squares were pushed even further, and we will never get to put our king on any of those squares. So going back, okay, we can just go back to the initial position and see what happened. We just traded rooks at first, and then black got closer to our pawn, and we played king to d3, and our opponent waited, didn't capture the pawn so that we don't take the opposition. Our opponent waited on d5, so that when we move to the c3 square, they capture and take the opposition. But now we don't have to move to the c3 square, since we know all these basic pawn end games. We can just push our pawn, because okay, here black must capture this pawn, okay, otherwise we're just pushing it. So when black captures, now we will get the opportunity to take the opposition and win this game again, because here already we are on a key square, and we have the opposition anyway, and we can continue occupying even further key squares, that even when we push our pawn, and those key squares will be needed, and this is just going to be winning for us. So going back, if we look at this position, black is trying to capture the pawn, we said, and here we just pushed our pawn. Of course, black might try not to capture the pawn, move back, but still there is no problem at all for us, because again, we can still take the opposition. Whenever they capture the pawn, again, we take the opposition and just continue in the same way. And if black doesn't capture the pawn, okay, what will they play? Then we are keeping both of our pawns, and having double pawns usually is an advantage, because we can use this, let's say, as an extra tempo. The pawn in the back, I can use it as an extra tempo. When black is trying to reach the position at the end, where taking the opposition usually would be good for black, because if I push and we reach this position, this is going to be a stalemate, right? So when we reach this position at any time, even after this check, I can just use this extra double pawn that usually would not be useful, just use it to push it and for my opponent to move away from the opposition, move away from the promotion square, and I will just be able to promote and win this game.